Hi, I'm Dr. Tasia White, and thank you for being here today. I'm excited to tell you about the research that I conducted through Drexel University's EDD program. I'm a recent graduate of the program and conducted this research under the supervision of Joyce Pittman. I was previously a college administrator and worked in student affairs at the collegiate level for over 11 years. And it was a very rewarding time period for me. And although I moved up really quickly in my professional experience, I do recognize that there were some experiences that were just different from my counterparts. And a huge part of me questioned whether those differences was because of my race or because of my gender. I started to question whether others were having similar experiences. And that's really why I wanted to focus my research on uncovering that question. Perhaps there's something systemic that we need to explore further, and that's something that I'm excited to share more information about. So before I get started, I want to give a brief shout out to my amazing dissertation committee who really helped to keep me on task, as well as providing me some different examples to help me broaden my scope. So as I mentioned previously, this topic is near and dear to me, and I think it really goes all the way back to when I think about my undergraduate experience and recognizing that there really weren't a lot of administrators of color in upper level positions, particularly at the executive level. And so as a student, I was able to recognize that, we had very few individuals that we could connect with on an interpersonal level who understood our background, who understood some of the challenges that we were facing. And so looking at it in present day, like a lot of that still had not changed at many of the institutions that I had attended. And so I felt like there was a need to explore that further, determine, what is causing this disparity between the diverse student population and student affairs administrative population, particularly at the upper level positions. Because when I looked at the number of Milana administrators at the entry level, it was, a pretty significant number, but as you move up towards middle and upper level positions, for some reason there seems to be a significant drop, and it wasn't due to the lack of positions being open, is what I determined in my research. So, really getting a sense for what is happening, what is the narrative that's out there, and how can we use that information to be more intentional about how we engage Milana administrators so that we have more of them in senior and executive level positions. And so with that, there were 4 questions that were really guiding my research to help me, filter all of the information that I was gathering, because again, it was a mixed method study. And so I really wanted the first question to focus on the quantitative information that I'd be gathering. So looking at whether or not there would be significant differences in professional experience by race/ethnicity. And I feel like that was really important to capture because, the experience of African American administrators may be different from Latinx American administrators. And so really trying to get a sense for what that looks like. So I felt like it was important to capture that in the survey form. And then for the remaining 3 questions, that was really geared towards my qualitative data that I gathered via interviews and some follow-up emails and things like that. And so really getting a sense for, what's keeping Milana administrators in the field, what, really influenced them to decide to work in higher education, and then getting a sense for what are some of the experiences that they're having in terms of trying to advance their career to upper level positions. So given the different components of my research study, I really felt like taking a pragmatism approach was the best stance for me because of the interworkings of working with a mixed method study, and Creswell talks a little bit about that and how that really fits into a pragmatist approach. But at the end of the day, I really wanted there to be some tangible action items that individuals as well as institutions could use and learn from in order to help expand their administrative color population. I really felt like, doing this research isn't just to help answer my questions, in terms of the experiences that I was having. I really wanted it to be something that could be, redone in other institutions, and helping them understand, how can they do a better job of, retaining their administrators of color, as early as the entry level, and then what are some components that can contribute to the advancement of those administrators should they decide to stay at that institution. And so really looking at it from a systematic approach, but then also providing some guidance for those at the individual level as well. Since a study like this had not previously existed, and some of the studies that were similar to mine were at least 10 years old, I really had to develop my own conceptual framework, which also served as my guide for my literature review. So I really broke my second chapter into these three different components, looking at the development of student affairs as a profession and why that's an important component in higher education, looking at how administrators of color have been instrumental in the development of students, and then focusing on retention and advancement and looking at it from a talent acquisition, talent management standpoint, which is the very unique piece in comparison to some of the other studies that I found, because again, this was something that had not been done before, and recognizing that there was a need to look at how talent management played a factor in recruitment and retention, and how institutions aren't tapping into that as a resource. So, so again, this was kind of my literature review outline. To collect my quantitative data, I decided to create my own survey where I used three different theories around employee engagement. So the first one was Maslow's motivational theories, particularly Maslow's hierarchy of needs as applied in a professional setting. The second one that I used was Kahn's personal engagement theory, where we looked at how employee engagement was an important component for job satisfaction. And then last but not least was Herzberg's two-factor theory of job satisfaction, where I looked at the components of hygiene factors and motivational factors and how that also contribute to one's commitment to their work. And so that really helped me to develop these 5 different categories for my survey, and really felt like that was the most important component to gather in terms of understanding the professional experiences of Moana administrators in higher education. So when I conducted the ANOVA, I determined that there was only a statistical significance in 2 specific instances, as you can see here on the slide, although the rest of the data that I collected provided some really interesting findings. So with the qualitative data, I looked at all of the responses as it pertained to the specific questions overall, and then I also broke it down further to look at what their responses would be by racial identity. And so this chart exists for each of the 5 categories within the survey. And so from my codes, I developed these 4 categories, or themes, I should say, that really described what the participants were explaining to me in terms of their own experiences. There were pieces that were just specific to them in terms of their identity, but then there were also some components that were consistent among the participants that I categorized as being something that is specific to higher education as a industry, and then also recognizing that there are some components that were specific to institution. I had individuals from various different institutions, and there were some similarities in terms of their experiences and how that impacted their overall well-being and their attachment to their positions. And so, from that, I developed this graphic to really describe, what components fell into these 4 different categories and how they all related. So from the information that I gathered from my interviews, I identified 3 different results that I was able to connect back to my literature review, and the following slides provide some more in-depth information about how those connections were made. So going back to my research questions, one of the things that really stood out to me is the fact that, there really aren't any specific pathways into the field of student affairs and higher education. In most industries, there's some kind of a pathway, some kind of a process, whereas in student affairs, there really isn't one. And so when I asked participants how they were introduced to student affairs as a profession, these were some of the examples that I received. So one of the things that was overwhelmingly clear to me is the fact that Milano Student Affairs administrators continue to do this work for the students. They recognize that there is a need for their presence, not only for the day-to-day component of being there for students, but also to be in spaces where decisions are being made, where racial identity needs to be considered as policies are being created. And so if nothing else, that is really what pushes them to continue to do that work and hopefully inspire others to join the higher education field so that more can continue to move up. In terms of my last research question, it was overwhelmingly clear that Milano Student Affairs administrators felt like they didn't understand what the clear path is for them as it pertains to advancing their career. They may have some mentors, they may have received some guidance along the way, but there wasn't anything that was really helping them understand, these are the types of skills and types of positions that they need to be in order to get to senior and executive level positions. The other piece was the fact that it was an expensive advancement, looking at the attainment of advanced degrees, adding on more student loan debt was something that also stood out to me as it pertains to their experience. And then lastly, recognizing that, institutions are doing a lot and many of them have some financial restraints. So while they, see those other components as being unfortunate, they are also realistic about what their institutions are able to provide them. So there were 3 main components that really stood out to me that I believe involves further exploration. The first one being the rigid requirements around career advancement in the student affairs profession and how a lot of that is, based on old paradigms from when the profession originally started about 100 years ago, and how the heavy emphasis on advanced degrees is really creating a financial hardship on those who genuinely want to work in the field but may not be able to do so because of not having the funds to be able to obtain advanced degrees. The second one being the fact that Milano Student Affairs administrators are an important presence, not only for students in terms of the day-to-day interaction, but also for the creation of policies and the advancement of the institution as a whole. To be able to understand what the needs are of students of color, having them being properly represented is really important. And then the last one being the fact that employee engagement does not seem to be an important component within the higher education human resources makeup. That may be the case for some institutions, but as a whole, there really isn't a model that helps employees understand how to advance their careers within higher education, but also it doesn't provide any context in terms of how to better retain individuals, specifically administrators of color, as well as helping them to advance to those upper level positions where it's really important, especially as the student population is continuing to grow. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I really hope that you learned a lot of things to help you in your own professional development, as well as help you with, understanding certain things within your own environment. One of the things that really stuck out to me after concluding this research was that there really aren't a lot of resources available to administrators of color to help them with some of the challenges that I highlighted in my research. And as a result of that, I've decided to, leave the higher education setting and go into my own coaching and consulting. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, whether it be on the panel or if you would like to send me a message. I will include my contact information as well.